Hi, Ria. You're very early today. I'm gonna run and do some other things.
Lot because they have to make their structures able to withstand the types of soil that they're in. All right, on to the next one. So soil erosion is one way that we lose our soils. And this little diagram here, you can see the types of erosion. So the two main types are wind erosion and then water erosion. So these other types of erosion that are listed on here, splash erosion all the way down to stream and channel erosion, are progressive and they're types of water erosion. So splash erosion is kind of like, if you can think back to that title slide we had, and it's kind of a classic picture too of the raindrop, one raindrop, and how it sends up the soil particles. So that's splash erosion, and then all the way to stream erosion, which Rachel will talk about a little bit. Yep. You can go. So wind erosion, I think the image that we really tend to think about with wind erosion, or at least I do, is the Dust Bowl. So this was a period of time. It started in 1934 and it lasted about 10 years. And what had happened was we had all these incentives to move west and start farming, but we stripped the soil of the vegetation. So then when there was a drought, all the soil was picked up and blown by the wind. Also at the same time, the other thing that happened was that because we had stripped the soil of those plants, if you're familiar with the water cycle, that evapotranspiration, the plants losing the water to the atmosphere wasn't happening. So it made it even more dry. So it was this cycle. And because the Dust Bowl, it really affected a large area of the United States, even though it was happening primarily in out west, Oklahoma, and kind of that area. That dust was carried even to the East Coast and to Washington, D.C. And when it got to Washington, D.C., that's when our legislators decided that there needed to be some action taken. So that's when my agency and our federal partner were formed as a result of the Dust Bowl. So could this ever happen? Do you think this could happen again today? Any ideas? Any thoughts on that? Do you think it could happen today? Well, you can go ahead, Rachel. Yes, yes, yes. So here's a picture from NASA, and you can see that kind of dust plume in the ocean that came from the interior part of Australia. Okay, next. And there are dust storms in China. And haboobs in Arizona, which I had never even heard of until a few years ago. And now it seems like they happen every few years. And all of this dust from the wind erosion, it can cause health problems. That was a big problem with the Dust Bowl. A lot of people got the dust in their lungs, and it was causing a lot of health problems and dust. But it's also, soil is a natural resource, so we want to keep it where it's at. Okay. Next slide. So water erosion is really what we see more in our area because we can see it visually. So I want to ask you on these two pictures, we can start with the one on the left. Can anybody make any observations for me of that picture? That's an example of stream bank erosion, a very dramatic picture of stream bank erosion. Anything? Do you see anything in that picture? The tree. Mm-hmm. Yep. The trees are going to fall over, right? And I don't know if you can see, it looks like there's kind of a little orange, it's some type of building back there. There's some machinery and there's a building, and that after a while, that stream bank's going to be really, really encroaching on that building. Yep, it does look like the water in the stream is gone. You're right. So I don't know if that's just a time that didn't have a lot of rain or what's going on there. You're right. That's a very good observation. Yep. So this is something too, that streams are always moving, water's always moving, but this shows very dramatically what happens in stream bank erosion. So then let's look at our right slide there. Any observations there? The stream was flooded. Mm-hmm. This one's actually one of our pictures, and it is a local creek, although I can't remember exactly which creek it is. The water looks polluted. Yep. Mm-hmm. The water is muddy. Yeah, I always call it a chocolate milk. It looks like chocolate milk to me. I say that chocolate milky look. Yep. 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 Dirty water. Very good. Great, guys. So all of this, yes, it does look like dust in the water. Perfect. So this is the soil that's been picked up and transported into the water. Along the way, it's the same with wind erosion too. Along the way, it's going to pick up any pollutants that are on the ground or that are in the soil. And then, yep, and it is mixing in with the clean water, right? And so when it's picked up and moved to new areas, I mean, think about in the stream, think about the fish that live there. How's it going to affect their gills and their or the mussels? And there are a lot of insects in the water. So it's going to affect all the living things in the water. And sometimes it transports things that can cause diseases too. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so here is an example of an experiment that you could do. So this is kind of a classic experiment. Maybe you've even seen it before. And again, I want to ask you for your observations. Do you have any observations? What do you see as far as differences between these three bottles? And while you're answering that, I will also say that a lot of times in the bottle that has the plants in it, you can use grass. The grass seed grows very quickly, and that's what I see a lot. Yep, the one with the plant has clear water. Yep, the green one is clear. Yep, very good. The moth. Yep, the plants filtered it. Okay. Yeah. So, and I don't know if you can think of any other extensions that you could do for this either. You could also, make sure that you measure out a cup of water and pour the cup of water on each of these and time it, see how long it takes to move through. You could maybe in some way simulate our more urban, suburban environments where you have all the paved surfaces. So you could use, I don't know, a piece of aluminum or maybe a cardboard covered with plastic wrap or something like that. So the water would hit it and then just run off. You could maybe try and add some type of pollution and as far as food coloring and see what happens that way. So I think there are a lot of different applications for this. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel unless anybody has any questions for me. Okay.
Great. So my name is Rachel West, and I'm the resource analyst at the Cane DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District. So Elizabeth was saying before that sometimes we work in agricultural areas, and then we've kind of since transitioned, since the land has been changing, and we also do urban areas. So I work pretty much strictly in the urban areas, and I work on the construction sites. And so my job is to collect observational data on the construction sites to determine whether or not they are following requirements from their permits, making sure they're keeping the water clean, and making sure that they're keeping soil from erosion out of streams, out of streets, and keeping everything really clean. I also do like reviewing permits, etc., stuff like that. So I'm going to show you two videos. They're of the same project, and this is a stream erosion project that we're going to be looking at. And so while we're looking at this video, go ahead and put any observations that you see about the video in the chat, and it's about 1.5 minutes. So you can go ahead. Oh, is it playing? There we go. Oops, uh-oh. Okay, try that again. There we go. So this is a detention basin that we're looking at here. And as I'm moving the screen in more, this is where the stream enters the detention basin. And notice you're seeing the water now. You're also seeing my shadow walk up the creek. Yeah, so go ahead and add anything if you see anything, any observations, kind of what does the soil look like, and like what does the vegetation look like around it. You may also notice that there's a pipe right there. Why is there a pipe there? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? The weeds and the plants look dry. Yeah, I think we're having some buffering issues also. Yeah, they look dry. The soil looks dry too. So you might notice as I'm going up, this does look a little bit different. It looks like there's more vegetation on both sides, and the creek itself is really dry, and that's just seasonal. That's because of the time of the year. But you'll notice it looks less exposed. It looks like there's less soil. So now this is the after photo. And so basically what happened after this is the contractor came onto the site, and they noticed that they were seeing that a lot of change has happened recently, and a lot of soil was coming off of the creek and into the detention basin, which is this pond that we're looking at right now. And so they determined to make some changes, some human changes, but you know, change isn't always bad. Sometimes change is good. So in the chat, go ahead and talk about the observations that you're seeing and the things that look different. So you'll notice there's like rocks in there. Like, what do you think about the size of the rocks? I wonder if that would matter. Different sizes of rocks could help. Also thinking about some experiments that you could do, like what are different sorts of materials that you could use to change the way that the sediment could be moving through the stream, or to change the way the soil could be moving through the stream as well. And you'll notice that when they came in and did this work, they didn't do anything to the vegetation. They left the vegetation where it was. Why do you think they might do that? All right, so that is the video. And so basically when they came in to fix the stream to make it more stabilized, they put all of these rocks down on the bottom. And they did that because that helps flow the water and it helps reduce the erosion in the stream. Because prior to that, all of the water was going into the detention basin. And like Elizabeth was saying, it was polluting it. I mean, it was harming any fish that might live in there. And also, they're just not supposed to do that. It's actually against the law. So next, I want to talk about some other erosion control measures that you maybe would see around your house. So this is what all of this black plastic that's wrapping around this construction sites, it's called silt fence. You may have seen it. You may have seen it in different stages of repair or rolled up on the side of the road. But basically what this does is it wraps around the perimeter of the site. And as you'll see all of the uphill of this, like kind of where that red truck is, and going down to the silt fence, that's all downhill. So when the rain comes, the soil will start to move downhill because there's no vegetation, there's no rocks, there's nothing really there to protect the soil. So the silt fence is there to catch it. And the silt fence has, it's plastic, but it's also porous. So it's got lots of little holes in it. And it's gonna trap the sediment, but it's gonna let the water flow through. And so that way there is no like sediment polluting anything downstream. And silt fence is pretty great. There are also different applications that you can use for a silt fence. And this is an example of a construction project where they just had a lot of excess dirt and they needed to put it somewhere for a second into what we call a stockpile. And then so they wrap the stockpile around in silt fence, and that prevents any of this large amount of soil to enter into the Fox River. It's the Fox River that's in the background there. So silt fence isn't the only thing that you'll see, because sometimes it's just not a good fit. And this would be an example of a time where it's not a good fit. And that's just because there is too much water incorporating it, and the silt fence can't possibly take on that much flow. And it's also just kind of a big pond, so there's not really anything moving here or there. So here's another example of a silt fence that could have been thought about differently. And that's going, I think this is the Fox River that it's going into. And does anyone have any thoughts about what could have been done differently to make this a little bit better? Like how could they have installed this so that it's not a bunch of sediment going into the river?
Miss Rachel, I don't want to interrupt you there, but
yeah.
I just want to apologize to everyone. It appears that we, are victims of some Zoom bombing. Maybe you've heard about it. At any rate, it was going so well, and we had such a great, interaction, and we have this interactive program planned. So we're going to turn the chat back on, but if we have any other misconduct, people will be kicked off. And unfortunately, we'll have to cut down the chat again. And we don't want to do that, because the whole point of this is for you guys to be able to interact with the wonderful panelists that we have. So we're gonna go ahead and put
It looks like Deb froze there, but we're going to turn the chat back on, but we can't clear it. But the people that put stuff in there are gone, just so you know. And after this,
we have people, so we'll be following up.
And
all right, sorry. Next.
Yeah, we removed everyone, and we can always go to the Q&A if we have to close the chat again.
There we go. It looks like we have our wonderful students back. So thanks guys for paying attention, helping out with it.
Yes, thank you. And that's a really good thing to consider, is that maybe the fence could be made out of different material. And that could be a really good experiment too, to see what different kinds of materials filters water differently. Different sizes of rocks, different kind of pieces of wood, etc. So with this silt fence, you're noticing that they just kind of stopped. And there's different reasons that they may have stopped. One reason could have been that they just didn't communicate well with their team and didn't finish the project. It could also be a property line that maybe they had to stop. But in any case, they should have thought about something different, and they should have thought about a way to fix it, because there is room for human error, but we have to, be adaptable and change and consider things differently sometimes. Yeah. Do you want to finish this out, Elizabeth?
Sure. So this is just a quote that I like. Land then is not merely soil, it's a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals. So I like it because it just kind of points out that everything is interconnected. Even though we don't often think of soil as being a living thing, it certainly is. So are there any questions before we hand it over to our next speakers?
I do have a couple of questions. If Elizabeth and Rachel, would you mind, I know we're a little past the 30 minutes, but would you guys mind talking about how you got into these fields and, how someone might follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I'll go first if you don't mind, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
So I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Dubuque in Iowa. And then from there, I worked in what we call applied ecology. So I was working, doing habitat restorations, doing prescribed fire, working with invasive plants, planting native plants, and then I moved to Washington, where I joined Conservation Corps out there, which is an AmeriCorps program. And so out there, I did a lot of the same stuff, working in wetlands, learning about environments, learning about soil, learning about infrastructures and soils like plants and et cetera. And I was able to take that experience and bring it to the conservation district. And if anyone is interested in pursuing natural resources, I highly recommend joining Conservation Corps. If you're someone who, for example, wants to take some time off from between high school and college, that's a really good thing to do. You can travel around the country and you can learn about different conservation techniques kind of just throughout the US.
And I got my degree in environmental biology from Eastern Illinois University. When I was there, one of the graduation requirements was that we had to do an internship. And I got an internship at the World Bird Sanctuary in St. Louis. And I was in the education department. I think because I said, yeah, maybe education would be an interest, but I had no clue. So then after that, I got an internship at Max McGraw up in East Dundee. And I wanted to do research. I think I might have applied for the research end of things, but I ended up in the education department again. But I really enjoyed it. So then I decided I was going to go the environmental education route. And then I came to the district, did education.
Perfect. Does anybody have any questions for for Ms. Hagen-Muller or also for Ms. West? Well, we really appreciate you guys very much. Thank you very much.
You're
We're giving you
welcome.
a virtual applause there. All right. So if you wouldn't mind stop screen sharing, Ms. West, that'd be awesome. And so next we have for you, acting up there. Next for you, two people who actually represent the community. So sometimes when we're doing this kind of work in the community, we reach out to people who are volunteers, and they might say that they don't have a lot of experience in science-wise, but they are community experts in wildflowers. They're coming to us from an organization called Wild Ones of Northern King County, Jean Muntz and Nancy Lamia, and hopefully they're going to tell us a little bit about themselves as well. And then they brought with them one of their friends, Suzanne, and I hope I'm saying Massey right. And so our next part of our project, our program, is designed to give you guys information about how matter and energy flow through an ecosystem, and also some projects you can do there as well. So I'm going to turn it over to them. Thanks very much.
Well, hi there. You're going to hear some real parallels with the former presentation. We're thinking about the same kinds of issues, clearly. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay, good. It's a real pleasure to get to talk to you guys tonight about our passion, which is wildness. And wildness, what is it? Where does it belong? In our houses, in our yards or common areas, in our neighborhoods, towns, cities? Where is it okay to be wild? Well, I represent an organization called Wild Ones, so you may not be surprised to hear that I believe it's natural for humans to live with wildness. And when we don't, it causes lots of problems, both for us and for the naturally wild world that we cut, hammer, pave, and otherwise force to be other than what it likes to be. Where we live now in our neighborhoods, in towns and cities, there used to be cornfields. And before the land was plowed for farms, there were prairies, woodlands, and wetlands. There was abundant wildness, land full of life, plants and animals, birds and trees, animals so tiny you couldn't see them, as they were talking about in the last presentation, and bison so big that large herds running across the prairie shook the earth. Well, today we've replaced the habitats that teemed with the wildness of life. We've installed lawns and cement. We've planted exotic plants from Eurasia, newcomers that don't know how to cooperate with the plants that grew up here. We've created our idea of a pretty outdoor picture. We've replaced live habitat that nurtures wildness, that brims with life, and more life, with this dead-like picture of nature that supports almost no life at all. But now the wildness we've tried to banish from our lives is making itself known in ways that have gotten our attention. For instance, our Earth is getting warmer and stormier, and humans are asking, what can we do to get back to the more balanced world that we took for granted? Maybe you think about these things yourself. Well, there are lots of ideas about what we can do to get ourselves out of this pickle. We picked one that makes a huge difference. It's not fancy, and it's something we can do without getting permission. We don't have to demonstrate to get laws changed. We don't have to apply for a permit. We can invite wildness into our own yard. We can start in our yard right away. So we call our solution Start in Your Yard. Start in Your Yard wants to wake people up to the idea that wild is good, it's healthy, and it can teach us to be wise if we're willing to listen. Now, most people have no experience with coaxing wildness into their yards and neighborhoods. We've done without wildness for so long that we think we don't need it. In fact, we've tried to make our outdoors more like our indoors, with neat and tidy lawns, free of anything that annoys us, predictable, perfect, we think, for us and our human friends. But we're discovering that living without wildness is not healthy for us. We're beginning to understand that as we got neater and neater in our neighborhoods, we got rid of things that we didn't understand, things that would keep our water clear and healthy, that would keep our air safe to breathe, that would shelter and feed insects and plants, the very organisms that we can't live without. Plants, and insects. Well, can you make lunch using only air, water, and sunshine? One person who's helped us understand what I've been telling you is Dr. Doug Tallamy. He's an entomologist. That means he studies insects, bugs, and he's written a book called Nature's Best Hope. Now, in his book, he explains why we need wildness in our yards. Then he gives us an idea for how to do it. Replace half our grassy lawn with native plants. Now, you might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound like much. But he points out that we have 40 million acres of lawn in our country. If you and I and everyone else were to make this change, it would create 20 million acres of habitat, 20 million acres of food for hungry critters. We'd create the largest national park in our country, bigger than our 13 largest national parks, including Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, the Smokies, Denali, the Everglades, Yosemite, and more, all combined. So Start in Your Yard asks, how can we turn people on to the fun of living with wildness right outside our doors? Living in the homegrown national park we'll build. Who, what can we coax back into our neighborhoods to live with us, so that when we go outside, there's always something really interesting to see if we look, just like in a national park. Now, most people haven't tried to persuade wildness to return to their yards. So there's a lot to learn about how to do it. We're just at the beginning. Everybody who signs up for Start in Your Yard will be trying out ideas to see what happens. And we like this way of approaching the problems we face. We like it much better than worrying, feeling overwhelmed by what's happening and deciding, there's nothing I can do because I'm just one person. Well, there is something I can do, something powerful and important. I can walk out my door, grab my spade or shovel, and begin making changes that invite wildness to join me. By planting native plants and learning to use the techniques nature uses, I can do something very important. Finally, I want to tell you about one very big thing we've learned from Dr. Tallamy and his research. Plants don't want to be eaten, so they've developed ways to survive insects that want to eat them. And they're very successful. Some are tough to chew, some smell or taste really bad, some make whoever eats them sick. They have lots of strategies. But over thousands of years, insects have learned to eat certain plants. Now, many insects have adapted to eating only one kind of plant. They're called specialists. And the monarch butterfly is a well-known example. Monarch caterpillars eat only milkweed. Now, people thought that milkweed was wild, not useful, and so they thought it was okay to get rid of it. What happened? Well, the monarchs began to disappear too. Why? Well, there wasn't enough milkweed to feed their caterpillars. There are insects that can eat more than just one family of plants, generalists. These insects can use a variety of food sources, up to as many as, wait, how many do you think I'm going to say? 100? 50? 10? 1,000? Nope, just 4. Insects can't eat just any old plant. So without the kind of plant it can eat, an insect is doomed, because it takes a very long time, way more than 100 years, for an insect species to adapt itself, to change enough that it can feed on a different kind of plant. Our birds must have insects to survive. Insects must have plants they can eat, but they can't eat the grass in our lawns. They can't eat plants that we brought in from far away. And in most of our yards, that's all there is: a grassy lawn with some plants, shrubs, and trees that developed with other insects in another part of the world. Start in Your Yard wants to encourage people to plant the plants that feed the insects that feed the birds, and bring wildness back into our yards, back into our lives. And now I want to pass the baton to Jean Muntz. She and I have been having a great time talking to people about the Start in Your Yard ideas, imagining what our towns will look like with wildness. She's going to talk in more detail about Dr. Tallamy's ideas and use the word we usually use instead of wildness, nature. Jean?
Thank you, Nancy. As a member of this group, Northern King County Wild Ones, one of the most frequently used words we use in the work we do is the word nature. So let's take a moment to develop a mutual understanding about the concept of nature, because to some, too many really, nature is something separate from us, something that exists out there, somewhere else, the public park, the forest preserve, the lake shore, Yosemite. But it might more accurately be explained the following way. Nature is not a place to visit, it is home. Or how about this thought from Andy Goldsworthy, who's an artist, sculptor, and environmentalist? We often forget that we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we have lost our connection to nature, we have lost connection to ourselves. In other words, we humans, animals, birds, plants, and even insects are all interconnected. And what we do to the environment, ultimately, we do to ourselves, our home. Today, we highlight some thought-provoking ideas from the book, Bringing Nature Home. The subtitle, A New Approach to Nature That Starts in Your Yard, by Dr. Douglas Tallamy. Biological wasteland is the term Dr. Tallamy suggests best describes our biologically barren lawn. In his book, he declares that every square foot dedicated to lawn is a square foot degrading our local ecosystem. Here we see an example of what is known as a monoculture crop, someone's beloved lawn. To maintain such a monoculture lawn requires an immense investment of time, energy, water, and chemicals. When it rains here, the lawn's unable to absorb most of it, and it becomes runoff into our neighborhood sewers, eventually into the Fox River and on. What we do here in our yards goes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, even with all the attention it is given, the soil beneath the grass becomes depleted. Is this not concerning? Especially when we read Dr. Tallamy estimates that the average residential lot is 80 to 90% turf grass. Well, thankfully, he is able to suggest a common sense approach to address this concern, and that's replace some of the grass with plants native to our location. Well, what makes native plants the right choice? Native plants, trees, and shrubs, those that were already here when the European settlers arrived, co-evolved with the other plants, trees, shrubs, insects, birds, animals, soil, climate, water of our area. And because of that, the native plants are the components in the life support system, we call it ecosystem, that produces our clean air and clean water and many other services as well. You know the story of the monarch butterfly whose larva can only eat our native milkweed. Well, that kind of specialist relationship is true for 90% of our native insects. So we can begin to conclude that all plants are not equal when it comes to the role they play in a given ecosystem. If they are not native and have been introduced to that area, they in essence steal from a native the location, the nutrients, the energy, and then they fail to fulfill a role in that area's ecosystem. If no controls or predators exist, they may go rogue and become invasive. Dr. Ptolemy suggests we think of invasive plants as ecological tumors, inhibiting our ecosystem to function. Decades ago, Aldo Leopold, a biologist and naturalist from neighboring Wisconsin, explained it all so brilliantly. And you've already heard this once this evening. Land then is not merely soil. It is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals. So I'm going to refer to this as a biodynamic engine that will start in your yard when you plant natives. Once it is initiated, this biodynamic engine becomes its own regenerating system, sending down deep roots that biodrill compacted soil 4 to 16 feet in some cases. They anchor, they add nutrients and remove pollutants. They participate in vast networks of communication and nutrient exchange with fungi and bacteria. They search for water, control erosion, sequester carbon, replenish the groundwater. Meanwhile, their leaves are solar collectors, capturing the sun's energy, passing it into the food web through insects, birds, animals. And the circuit continues as any waste generated by this system becomes food. Once you have the key, you can start in your yard to tap into this biodynamic engine. Now, here's our challenge with this new approach. Can we change our standard of beauty from one of an expansive, manicured, mowed, monoculture crop of grass to a yard that we would describe as filled with birdsong, buzzing with bees, swaying in the breeze, humming with activity, teeming with life? These descriptions are all evidence that we are reconnecting with that biodynamic engine, and it is at work. It contains mysterious, integrated, dynamic relationships. This garden attracts enough bees, butterflies, moths to pollinate flowers and crops. It restores groundwater, sequesters carbon, it removes toxins, it keeps numbers in check, recycles and nourishes the soil. It offers sheltered passageway, safe habitat, and food for many. Dr. Ptolemy has counted how many caterpillars mom and dad chickadee need to feed one clutch of babies. Spoiler alert, it's thousands. And that caterpillars transfer more energy from plants to other animals than any other plant eater. And here's the clincher. With this diversity, the land becomes resilient, able to mitigate, let's use the word heal, able to heal the effects of ecological damage. And we reconnect to this integrated and energetic system. Many suggest it even performs services we don't yet understand. It is amazing, astonishing, beautiful. No mow, no water, no fertilizer needed. Think of it, with a simple decision to replace some grass with natives, we generate a system that does all that. When we become a part of the ecosystem, rather than living apart from it, We participate with nature and steward a yard we understand is shared with many creatures. Each yard is a piece in a great mosaic. Researchers tell us gardening can be an antidepressant, and even brief exposures to the natural world will produce measurable medical and social benefits. We can care about something, but the real work of the world is to care for it. Healing will come not by minimizing our impact, but by changing the nature of our impact. Native gardens have much to teach. Universal wisdom like what we save saves us, and what we appreciate appreciates. The native plants will show us what we do to heal our yards is an act of reciprocity, of giving back, of saying thanks for the gifts the plants give us. And the earth will reciprocate with an increased ability to draw down carbon, creating more resilient land right where we live. Just start in your yard. Now I would like to turn to Suzanne Macy, a botanist. She is full of ideas and information about plants, and until recently worked at the Chicago Botanic Garden.
Well, thank you, Jean. And hello to all of you. It's a real pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm going to approach my talk with just a very few specifics that will illustrate perhaps a lot of what has already been discussed. I'm a botanist and I've been crazy about plants since I was a kid. I'm still learning more and more about them all the time. They each have a very fascinating story. Did you know that there are about 3,600 plants in the state of Illinois? But I'm going to tell you only about 2 of them. I guess I'll need the slide, Nancy. The first is the white oak. This is a majestic tree when it is full grown. White oaks and other oaks can live to be 300 or more years old. One oak in McHenry County, they called her Betty White Oak, was sadly blown down this past August by the derecho. Remember those terrible winds we had that knocked down a lot of trees in Elgin, I believe. Betty dated back to around 1611. That's more than 300 years old. One famous white oak in Connecticut was between 500 and 600 years old. That's a little higher than a 10-story building. Well, some oaks grow to be up to 145 feet, and that's a little higher than a 10-story building. And by the way, did you know that in 1973, school children voted the white oak to be the Illinois state tree? But what's more interesting to me than the numbers and the size that oaks can reach, oaks, like all plants, don't live alone. And this gets back to Jean's comment about ecosystem. They are part of a whole natural system that we call ecosystem, or what Jean also called a biodynamic engine. I love that phrase. Oaks are especially good at this. They are home and a food source to hundreds of organisms that live in their roots, trunks, branches, and leaves, eat their acorns. Just a few examples, almost 950 caterpillars of moths and butterflies live on the oaks in the United States. And in my own zip code, and very close to yours, 456 caterpillars. Caterpillars feed baby birds and bats, and later those that survive this become butterflies and moths. Squirrels, blue jays, chipmunks, deer, ducks, woodpeckers, and raccoons eat the acorns. Okay, back to the numbers game. Scientists have recorded 150 species of wildlife that eat acorns. Many insects spend winter under the oak leaves that fall to the ground, so don't rake all of your leaves, leave some for the insects. Microscopic organisms live in the soil and around oak roots, and we heard a lot about that earlier in the soil part. It's all part of the food web. And oaks take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to clear the air. They store carbon in their trunks and roots, and like all green plants, they produce oxygen for us to breathe. All of this is discussed in the book that Nancy and Jean have already talked about, Nature's Best Hope. And here are some interesting questions about oaks for you to explore, but there are so many. How many oaks are in your neighborhood? You can take a little tour and maybe do some mapping. Why do oaks keep their dried brown leaves during the winter, especially on their lower branches, when most other trees lose all of their leaves? You can plant young oak saplings in your yard and watch them grow. It would be a great start to begin a Start in Your Yard project. So next I'm going to talk about another plant, the common violet. So we're turning from a tree to a very small plant. Do you know the common violet is sometimes called the dooryard violet? It was also voted by school children to be the Illinois state flower in 1907, 113 years ago. And violets do grow in backyards, like mine. Some people think violets are weeds, but I kind of like them in my lawn. They form a nice low mat with beautiful purple flowers that bloom for a long time and also feed the insects. And just as an aside, to follow up on Jean's comments, my family has converted about 60% of our front lawn to prairie and woodland native plants, and we really love it. So smell a violet next spring. Their scent is very delicate and lasts just a moment for us humans, but that scent attracts insects, especially bees. And our next slide, the common violet and other violets are host plants for the eggs and caterpillars of this beautiful, great spangled fritillary. So you see here, the fritillary is nectaring or sipping nectar from a native thistle plant, but she will lay her eggs on a violet. So did you know that violet flowers and stems can be eaten and contain lots of vitamin C? If they grow in your yard, you can pick them for your salad, but don't pick them in a park or a preserve, and don't eat them if you spray your lawn. I find it fascinating that the common violet and other violets have two types of flowers. The purple flowers you see on the screen, I'm sure you recognize. But violets have another flower that never opens. It looks just like a tiny flower bud and produces seed within itself without insects to pollinate it. It would be a very interesting project to learn how and why this happens among the violets. There are 28 kinds of violets just in Illinois. Some are purple like this one. Others are pale blue, yellow, and white. You can buy violet plants or seeds to put in your yard, again, for in my backyard project. Most violets need some shade, but some grow in sun, including a few that grow in prairies. And that is appropriate because, as you know, Illinois is the prairie state. I wish I had time to tell you many more stories about plants. Perhaps this will pique your interest, but now I'll turn it back to Nancy to wrap up.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm glad to know I can put violets in my salad. Now, after hearing about Start in Your Yard, you may be intrigued and want to know what we're doing next. And of course, we want to tell you. This winter, we're going to be reading Dr. Talamy's newest book, Nature's Best Hope, along with you if you decide to join in. This is a community read that we'll be hosting with our partners. The Gail Borden Public Library, along with its sister libraries, is already scheduling follow-up sessions, and in January, you'll be able to sign up. If you'd rather, you can decide to host your own session with people you'd like to include, or maybe you'll suggest the idea of reading and discussing Nature's Best Hope to a favorite organization or church. We invite you to join us. It was a pleasure to get to tell you about our love and respect for the natural world, which includes all of you and all of us. Deb?
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you guys so much, all 5 of you. But I really, really, really appreciated Nancy, Jean, and Suzanne. I really appreciated your presentation because it's so true. And I know that Elizabeth and Rachel share that same passion as we all do, right? About kids and learning, and about that we all have that ability to take action and to do something. I know that we're running a little bit late, but would the 3 of you also mind answering a question about how do we get involved in the yard program, but then also, how did the 3 of you get into this field, into wanting to do this work?
Well, in terms of getting involved with Start in Your Yard, we're such beginners that all we have so far is an email address, which is startinyouryard@gmail.com. I think it was on that last slide. But Jean, do you want to tell the story of the genesis of this idea? But you'll have to unmute. We were on a committee together, and
the Northern King County Wild Ones that we're members of, we were raising money, enough money to bring Doug Ptolemy to Elgin to be a keynote speaker at a green expo last March and April. Well, COVID-19 changed everything. And whereas at the same time, we on that committee had been sort of mumbling amongst ourselves saying, his idea about starting in your yard and, being part of a homegrown national park, that could be an Elgin undertaking or a community-wide, just around Elgin undertaking. And so we had already, there was already this vision about what would it take to do a Start in Your Yard program in Elgin. So one thing led to another, to another, to another, and the ball never stopped rolling and gathering as that vision was talked about around the city. And all of a sudden we had partners like the Conservation Foundation and U46 and the Gail Borden Library and the Elgin Sustainability Commission. And so we're at a point where it has a life of its own, and it's pulling us to ever greater and more interesting projects. So,
and I must say, when we met with you the first time, Deb, and I heard about the kinds of things that you think about all the time and that were so new to me, I went right home and called Suzanne and said, you are a scientist, we're going to need your help. So that's how, and she, do you want to say a little bit about how you responded, Suzanne? Oh, you're muted.
Okay. Oh, okay, here I am. Well, I came in this through you, through sort of like the back door, because I knew you through you and Jean and others through our environmental reading club. And I had been involved with native plants, like it seems like forever. And, we started growing them in our own, on our own property. So I just have almost a lifetime of being involved. And then when you suggested working on this project, I thought, well, I can do that. I'm retired. I have a little bit of extra time, which disappears rapidly, actually.
You're involved with the Illinois Native Plant Society, right?
Yes, yeah, right. I'm actually the vice president of the Illinois Native Plant Society. So that's another connection.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and we really appreciate you guys volunteering your time. We certainly hope that some students will take this project and other people. We've got it on Facebook. We'll post it on our YouTube channel. And I would love to talk to you guys about doing the National Biodiversity Teach-In, because I think that would be another great way that we could get this word out.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's what happens when you get involved with us.
We're getting on to Deb, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I just want to thank Nancy and Jean and Suzanne and Elizabeth and Rachel. This was a really awesome way to end our series of 4. And I hope students got a lot of ideas. This is the point where we let students talk to us about their ideas, and you guys are welcome to hang out and help answer questions, or you're welcome to leave, whichever works best for you. I saw that, I think, is it Rhea Frankie that wants to be promoted to the panel?
No, that was an accident that I was clicking through, and I'm like, oh my gosh, did I just make a kid a panelist? And I did. Sorry, Rhea.
That's so funny. Well, do any of our remaining students want to ask any questions? Do you guys want to rush any ideas by us? We're hoping this series made you guys feel inspired for projects. So just let us know. We also want to apologize for what happened earlier, and I want to thank my team for getting that under control quickly. Fortunately, so everybody on here knows, fortunately, they were only sending those messages to us.
Okay.
Deb,
everyone else.
Rhea is asking, are we going to get another email about registration?
Yes, you are. And so, yes, so Rhea, you'll get another message about, and that will come out soon. We are meeting as a team to finalize. We want to finalize what that application process looks like, going back and forth about a couple of things. But yes, you'll get it. And guess what? You have my email. So if you don't get that registration, by the first week of December, by December 4th, you email me personally and I will make sure that you get it. We make sure. I definitely want to see your project. I'm excited about it. Anybody else? Well, thank you guys so much. That was really fun. And everyone have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know you guys are going to be on my list of what I'm definitely thankful for. So take care, everybody.
Thanks, ladies.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.